Hello, everyone. My name is Lindsay Brandt. Gawona Howie is my Mohawk name. It means she carries the words. I'm presenting today from Tyendinaga Mohawk territory. So I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I find myself on. In a Mohawk community, in my home community, and my connection to this place is a very deep one. This is where I was born and raised. It's where my family resides, where I'm connected most to my culture and to the land here. And it's a very special and meaningful place to me. I just encourage all of you to take a few moments each day to ground yourself and find yourself in connection with the land in some way. Examine what land means to you and what the space around you means to you, and just think about those things. And today I've been thinking about how grateful I am for the land and for the sustenance that all of creation provides to me. So with that, we'll get started with a conversation today about decolonization and indigenization, finding our way along the path. I created this webinar or this talk out of the question that I get asked most often when I'm delivering trainings or when I'm in conversation with various people across campus is, what is decolonization versus indigenization? What are the differences? What are the definitions of those two terms, and what do those two terms mean or represent, or what can they mean, and what do they mean in different contexts? So I think today we'll open up that discussion a bit, but we'll talk about the journey and where those two words can kind of lead us into action together, either collectively or individually as community members in the Queen's campus. So firstly, what is decolonization? So defining decolonization is an arduous task because there are so many contexts, understandings, viewpoints about what it can or should mean, and also what it doesn't mean. So understanding what decolonization means really comes down to how we understand colonization and our place within that process. If we try to understand, or at least have a sense of what colonization is, we can then begin to view decolonization as an undoing or unlearning of the colonial mindset. We can then create space for Indigenous ways of knowing, including social, political, spiritual, cultural contexts, and worldviews to emerge. So let's really embark on a journey together of reimagining life, teaching and learning, and our place within all of it, not with the goal of reaching a destination, but through thoughtfully and continually looking inward and outward to find our way along this path. So what does decolonization look like at Queen's? At Queen's, decolonization can mean many different things, such as building capacity in strategic areas to support Indigenous programming, recognizing and supporting Indigenous scholarship and traditional knowledge, integrating Indigenous knowledge into curricula across academic programs, developing training and guidelines for Indigenous research and work with Indigenous communities, continuing to build the capacity of the Office of Indigenous Initiatives and other meaningful inclusion of Indigenous voices in policy, decision-making at senior admin levels and beyond. So it means continuously engaging with and integration of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions, and then Queen's own report that was generated in response to those calls to action called Extending the Rafters. And those are linked here in the presentation, and you can access those on the website as well. So this information around decolonization and indigenization comes directly from the Office of Indigenous Initiatives website. It's a very good hub, a good resource for connecting with all things Indigenous at Queen's, and where you can go to access different supports and different resources and things like that. I'm very closely connected with the Office of Indigenous Initiatives with my work and my role as an educational developer, Indigenous pedagogies and ways of knowing. So I work in the Center for Teaching and Learning, but I very closely align and work with the Office of Indigenous Initiatives as well. So what is indigenization then? So if we think about decolonization as the unsettling or undoing of colonial power and structures and those ways of learning and teaching, then indigenization can be understood as the redoing or reaffirming of education to include Indigenous ways of knowing, thinking, feeling, believing, and being. So this work really involves elevating the voices of Indigenous peoples, meaningful inclusion of traditional and cultural knowledge, intentional inclusion of Indigenous ways of teaching and learning, to form and create pedagogical approaches. So I'm often asked, is the work of Indigenization only to be done by Indigenous peoples? I think it is a sensitive topic. Many people will express different views on this. Some say absolutely it must only be done by Indigenous peoples. Others say it can be done by non-Indigenous peoples, but very carefully, with strong connections, strong learning on the part of the non-Indigenous person to understand Indigenous peoples and worldviews, and it has to be done in connection with Indigenous peoples. I tend to believe that that definition, or that idea, that it is work that we can all engage with and in together. But it does require respectful relationship building, ongoing consultation, and partnership with Indigenous peoples. It requires a willingness to continually engage in unlearning, unpacking of biases, examining power and privilege, and constantly learning from and with Indigenous peoples about their ways of knowing and their lived experiences. So I think at some point along your journey, along your path, you'll get a sense for when you feel like you've developed yourself enough to know when to step forward and when to step back, when to take action on your own, or when you might need to do some more learning or partner with an Indigenous person to experience or share the knowledge that you're hoping to share in a good way. I think a lot of it comes down to intention. You want to think about why you're doing the work, why you're including it in your course, or why you're including it in conversation, and are you the best person to be speaking to it, or do you need to do some more learning, or do you need to approach it in a different way? Are there different voices that can emerge or need to emerge in that situation or that conversation? So it really is a delicate balance, but I think that with experience and with time and with just a really good heart and a good mind about it, it's possible for all of us to engage in both decolonization and indigenization. So there are various types of indigenization, and Gaudry and Lawrence really did a good job of outlining three distinct uses of that term across post-secondary institutes in Canada. So the first definition that they outline is Indigenous inclusion. So Indigenous inclusion is a policy that aims to increase the number of Indigenous students, faculty, and staff in the Canadian Academy. Consequently, it does so largely by supporting the adoption of Indigenous people to the current, often alienating culture of the Canadian Academy. So that can be like different programs to ensure access to programming at universities or higher ed institutions. Maybe there's different policies or admissions policies or processes that can be changed to allow for greater inclusion. Or maybe there's another approach to recruitment that can take place for those specific to Indigenous communities. The second definition is reconciliation and indigenization, and this is a vision that locates indigenization on common ground between Indigenous and Canadian ideals. It creates a new, broader consensus on debates such as what counts as knowledge, how should Indigenous knowledge and European-derived knowledge be reconciled, and what types of relationships academic institutions should have with Indigenous communities. So this really requires that relationship building, that nation to nation sense, where Indigenous peoples and Indigenous communities are seen as equal partners in those conversations around what Indigenous inclusion looks like, or what indigenization looks like on a broader scale across Queens or across campuses in Canada. So then the third definition is decolonial indigenization, and this really envisions the wholesale overhaul of the academy to fundamentally reorient knowledge production based on balancing power relations between Indigenous peoples and Canadians. And this is where you begin to see the transforming of the academy into something dynamic and new. This definition is very idealistic, and I don't think that any organization in Canada is there yet. It's the goal that everyone wants to see us striving towards and working towards, and definitely in my vision for what I would like to see happen in post-secondary institutions as an Indigenous person, I would love to see decolonial indigenization really take effect and take hold, but it's a complicated and winding path to get there. As we all know, the work of decolonization and indigenization is not easy work. It's difficult. There's many different ideas on how this can be done. There's many different perspectives on what it even looks like or feels like or can be or should be. And there's also a lot of fear around decolonial indigenization, because does it mean that we tear down all the structures, everything that we've known about education, Western education in Canada? Does that need to be dismantled fully for indigenization to occur? I think there's a fine balance in the amount that we do things, and I really truly do believe that it requires both and. So it requires both that we do decolonize, but we indigenize, and we do those in a way that balances things out and makes us realize that there are strengths to be had in Western ways of doing things, and there are strengths to be had in Indigenous ways of doing things. And why don't we take the best of both worlds? Draw from those strengths, pull them together, and create something that's new and stronger and better and greater for all. Easier said than done, I know. It is a challenging thing to envision and even see how that might unfold. But I choose to believe that that is actually achievable. There's no real point at which we can say we've done it, we've decolonized, we're fully indigenized, we've done this. I don't think that there's a checkbox. There's no real way of knowing that we've got to that destination or that ideal. But there are certain checkpoints along the way where we can check in with ourselves and begin to feel a sense of accomplishment and achievement, that we are really doing good work, and we're doing work in a good way, in a meaningful way that does allow for the elevation of Indigenous voices, Indigenous ways of knowing, and really validates that those are valid ways of knowing and always have been, and just re-infusing those into the university and the higher ed setting where they've maybe been absent for far too long. And I think there are ways to infuse those ways of being and knowing, and it'll only strengthen the existing structures, and it might change, and it might be a little bit painful at times. Those growing pains are very painful, but I think we will begin to see so much strength, so much love, and so much grounding, and just a new, very unique and beautiful approach to education emerge. Okay, so the journey along the path, you may be asking yourself, where do I begin? So you want to ask yourself why you want to decolonize. Who are you doing it for, and why are you doing it? So my colleague Robin Addis actually pointed out these two important questions that you need to ask yourself when you're starting out. So who are you doing it for, and why are you doing it? So those are really important for all of us to really think about, to sit with, and then to continually ask along the path and figure out if those answers changed, why did they change? If those answers have remained the same, are you okay with them remaining the same, or do they need to change? Do you need to stretch and bend a little bit more? Do you need to do different things, or take on different tasks, or change the way that you're walking along the path? So it's important to remember that decolonization, indigenization, and reconciliation are all processes and journeys. There's no endpoint, no destination, but rather a constant experience of searching, finding, and rediscovering your way along that path. So another tip to begin is to find and build a community of practice. So find people who are also doing the work of decolonization and indigenization, and join them along the path. Help guide and support each other, and be constantly willing to listen, to step up and step back as needed, to unlearn, to relearn, and experience things from a place of humility, respect, care, and love. I think that's the work and the responsibility of all of us as educators, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. We need to think about ourselves in relation to our environment, to nature, to connection, to community, to each other, to our own selves. Really think about yourself in relation. How are you internally? How can you make some shifts and some changes, and take on some learning, and take up some agency for the way that things are? If you want to see a change, how are you going to act to make sure that those changes happen? Who do you need to join with to make sure that these happen? What resources might you need? What learning do you need to take part in to make sure that you can help create positive change? So those are all things that you can think about, and reach out to the Center for Teaching and Learning or the Office of Indigenous Initiatives for guidance on. There's a lot of resources on the websites, both websites, and there's a lot of resources to be found within your own departments and within your own faculties, and through conversations with colleagues about why this work is important, and then how you can work together to make sure that this work stays on everyone's mind and on everyone's hearts as we all move forward as a university and as a community. So, one way in which I hope to achieve a sense of community building and a sense of let's help each other along this path is I've created a decolonization drop-in series for this fall, and it'll likely repeat again in the winter if we find that it's useful to get together, like I think we will. I think these decolonization drop-in series are going to be very informal but very engaging discussions. So they're really intended for anyone, faculty, grad student, staff, anyone doing the work of decolonization and indigenization in their own courses who would value the opportunity to have a discussion with colleagues to form a virtual community of practice or circle of support around this topic. And obviously now, when things are remote, it will be virtual, and perhaps at some point when we're back on campus, we will also have some opportunities to engage face to face again and have these conversations as a drop-in style, more informal, more laid back, and kind of come as you are, come as you can fit it into your schedule and things like that. So what I've done though for this fall is to make 2 separate times during each week. So Tuesdays, it'll be 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. And then Thursdays, 1:30 to 2:30. And that is hopefully so that it can fit as many schedules as possible. And you'll be able to make either one time or the other, maybe not every week, but a few weeks here and there. And I'll just be happy to join with anyone that wants to have these conversations and to help facilitate and guide everyone through their understanding and their approach to these things. And I think it doesn't matter that we will all be at different stages. Some of us might be very new to the process. Some of us might be more experienced in the work that we've been doing in decolonization and indigenization, but we all can learn something from each other. I always find that I learn so much from consultations with faculty and staff and students and anyone doing this work. I learn so much just by opening up and listening and understanding and seeking to share and exchange knowledge. And I really truly hope that this community will strengthen the decolonization efforts at Queen's and will empower and enable all of us to feel a sense of agency and urgency in this regard and be able to take that back to our faculty, take that back to our colleagues and share it with them and share our knowledge with each other. So I wanted to thank you so much for listening today. This is a recording that you can access now because it was meant to be an in-person webinar that needed to be canceled and rescheduled. And because we were all so busy, I thought it would be nice to record it and make it a bit shorter so that you can just listen and then come to the drop-in or reach out to me directly to engage in further conversation around this topic. So here are the references that I've used today. So we've got the reference to Indigenization as inclusion, reconciliation, and decolonization, navigating the different visions for indigenizing the Canadian Academy. And that's a journal article. And then we have the Queen's Centre for Teaching and Learning website around decolonizing and indigenizing, where my colleague Robin Addis has created a really great article talking about the differences between those definitions. And that was written collaboratively with many Indigenous and non-Indigenous colleagues across campus. And then the Queen's Office of Indigenous Initiatives has a really good section on the website around decolonizing and indigenizing. And I'm continually creating new resources and webinars. You can check out the Center for Teaching and Learning for various recorded versions of webinars and workshops that I've done. There's a lot of resources and support on our CTL website around teaching and learning, pedagogy, building classroom community, inclusive teaching practices, those types of things. So thank you very much for listening and thank you for watching. And I really look forward to seeing and meeting all of you. And I hope to see as many of you as possible out to those decolonization drop-ins if you can make it. And if those times don't work for you, please feel free to reach out to me directly and I will set up a time for us to get together to engage in conversation around this. Thank you very much, Nyawagoa, and I look forward to seeing you and chatting with you soon.